Goiânia, March 15, 1985. The capital of Goiás breathed the hot air of the Cerrado on that Friday, which seemed absolutely ordinary. The sky was clear, with few clouds, and the temperature hovered around the typical early autumn warmth of central Brazil. At the time, the country was experiencing the first moments of re-democratization after 21 years of military dictatorship, and a feeling of hope hung in the air. The couple Antonio Carlos and Maria Helena Ferreira, aged 33 and 29, respectively, were preparing for a trip that, according to what they had told neighbors and relatives, would be brief. They were accompanied by their identical twin sons, Pedro and Paulo Ferreira, who had just turned 3 the previous month. The family lived in a modest but well-maintained house in the University District, a middle-class neighborhood in Goiânia. Antonio Carlos worked as an accountant in a construction company, while Maria Helena was a teacher in the state education system. Described by neighbors as discreet but friendly, the couple followed a calm routine centered around raising their children, who were the pride of the parents. They were always very dedicated to the kids. Antonio and Maria had a very close family with no apparent problems, said Dona Odette Goncalves, a neighbor of the family for nearly 5 years, in a statement to the police days later. On the morning of March 15th, witnesses saw the family leaving their house around 7:30 a.m. Antonio was carrying 2 medium-sized suitcases in the trunk of their 1983 metallic blue Volkswagen Gol. Maria Helena was holding the hands of the little twins, dressed identically, in denim overalls and white t-shirts, as shown in the last photographs taken of the children. What is known, based on witness accounts and official records, is that the family stopped at a gas station on the outskirts of the city, where they completely fueled the vehicle. The gas station attendant remembered the family because of the twins who, according to him, were happily playing in the back seat. Antonio's last official communication was a phone call made to his mother, Dona Conceição Ferreira, around 9 a.m. that day, informing her that they were heading to solve an important matter at a farm near the city of Rio Verde, about 220 kilometers from Goiânia, and that they would return in 3 days at most. None of them were ever seen again, at least not as a family. The alarm for their disappearance was only raised on Monday, March 18th, when Antonio did not show up for work and did not answer his boss's calls. Maria Helena also failed to appear at the school where she taught. It was Dona Conceição, Antonio's mother, who first realized that something was wrong when she went to her son's house and found it locked with accumulated mail. The first search efforts were informal, with relatives calling hospitals and police stations along the route to Rio Verde. On Tuesday, March 19th, an official missing persons report was filed at the Goiânia Missing Persons Department. The police immediately began a search operation, sending notices to all police stations in the state of Goiás with the description of the family and the vehicle. Barriers were set up on major highways, but no sign of the metallic blue Gol or the Ferreira family was found. The first 72 hours after the missing persons report were crucial and intense. The civil police of Goiás assigned the experienced delegate Raimundo Claudio Silva to lead the investigation. Authorities were working with multiple initial hypotheses: an accident in a remote area, kidnapping, voluntary escape, or, in the worst-case scenario, a crime. The first clues emerged when the authorities managed to trace the family's initial route. Security cameras at a checkpoint on the border between the municipalities of Goiânia and Trindade recorded the passing of the metallic blue Gol at 10:15 a.m. that Friday. This was the last confirmed official sighting of the vehicle. A key witness emerged 5 days after the disappearance. José Pereira dos Santos, a roadside merchant in Acrua, a municipality between Goiânia and Rio Verde, claimed to have seen the family stop at his store around 12:30 p.m. on March 15th. According to his account, they bought water, sodas, and snacks. The man seemed tense, constantly looking around. The woman was quiet, with a worried expression. The children were calm, eating biscuits, Jose stated in his official deposition. This information led the police to focus their search efforts. In the Acrua region, especially along rural roads and adjacent farms, helicopters flew over the area for days, while ground teams searched difficult-to-reach locations. No trace of the vehicle or the family was found. Twist in the investigation occurred when authorities discovered that Antonio Carlos had withdrawn a significant sum of money, approximately 15 million cruzeros, the currency at the time equivalent to about 3 months of his salary, the day before the disappearance. This strengthened the hypothesis of a planned escape, possibly due to unknown problems. Authorities began to investigate the couple's background more deeply. It was discovered that, despite their apparent normalcy, Antonio Carlos had been facing financial difficulties. He had taken out significant loans in the months prior, and a preliminary audit of his work raised suspicions of small embezzlements. However, none of this had been officially confirmed or resulted in any formal charges. We were dealing with a complex case that could have multiple motivations. With every lead we followed, new questions arose, said Delegate Silva years later in an interview about the case. One of the false leads that consumed significant resources in the investigation was the report of a couple with young children crossing the border into Paraguay. 3 days after the disappearance, teams were sent to the location only to discover that it was a different family with no connection to the case. 6 months after the disappearance, an intriguing development occurred. The family's car, the metallic blue Gol, was found abandoned on a vacant lot on the outskirts of Anápolis, a city about 50 kilometers from Goiânia, in the opposite direction of Rio Verde. The vehicle was completely cleaned inside, with no fingerprints or any traces that could indicate the whereabouts of the family. The experts found only a children's doll in the trunk, identified by the children's grandmother as belonging to one of the twins. The location where the car was found raised new questions. Why was it in Anápolis if the family was supposedly traveling to Rio Verde? Could it have been deliberately left there to confuse the investigation? The abandoned vehicle significantly altered the course of the investigation. The discovery of the car in Anápolis led the police to trace possible connections the family had in that city. It was discovered that a distant cousin of Maria Helena lived in a neighborhood near where the vehicle was found. Cousin Claudio Mendez was intensively interrogated, but nothing conclusive was obtained. He claimed he hadn't been in contact with the family for years and had no knowledge of any reason for their disappearance. Meanwhile, the families of Antonio Carlos and Maria Helena were living through the drama of no news. Donna Conce Cu, Antonio's mother, then 58 years old, became the family's spokesperson in the media, frequently appearing on television programs, pleading for information about her son, daughter-in-law, and grandchildren. We can't live without knowing what happened. If they are alive, please let us know. If something terrible has happened, we need to know to find peace, she declared in an emotional interview on the Brazil Urgent TV program. 8 months after the disappearance, as the first year passed without answers, the police hypotheses continued to multiply, while the hope of finding the family alive diminished. The investigation began to cool, and the case gradually received less attention from the authorities, though it was never officially closed. Years went by without concrete answers. The Ferreira case gradually turned into an urban legend in Goiás, fueled by speculations and theories, ranging from involvement with criminal organizations to alien abductions, the latter being completely baseless. In 1989, 4 years after the disappearance, a twist brought the case back to the headlines. Child with a strong physical resemblance to the missing twins was seen in a small town in the interior of Minas Gerais. After intense investigations and DNA tests, still an emerging technology in Brazil at the time, it was confirmed that the child was not one of Ferreira's sons. The case faced one of its biggest obstacles in 1992 when a fire at the Goiânia police station destroyed part of the physical records related to the investigation. Although copies of important documents had been stored elsewhere, valuable information was lost, further hindering the investigation's progress. In 1995, exactly 10 years after the disappearance, the case was formally reclassified as unsolved pending, a bureaucratic designation, meaning that, although it was not considered resolved, no intensive resources would be dedicated to the investigation unless new significant evidence emerged. Dona Conceição, Antonio Carlos's mother, passed away in 1998 without ever knowing what happened to her son and his family. Before she died, she had established a small foundation dedicated to searching for missing persons in Goiás, which continued its work after her death, keeping the memory of the Ferreira case alive. The turn of the millennium brought new hope with advances in investigative technologies. In 2003, the case was reopened as part of a federal government initiative to review unsolved missing persons cases. Using advanced facial recognition technologies, authorities compared photographs of the twins with adoption databases, orphanages, and schools across the country. Again, no conclusive matches were found. A significant moment occurred in 2007 when the federal police, investigating an international human trafficking network, found documents suggesting that the twins might have been taken abroad. This lead prompted international cooperation with Interpol, but after 2 years of investigation in South American and European countries, no concrete evidence was obtained. In 2015, coinciding with the 30th anniversary of the disappearance, a documentary produced by a national broadcaster rekindled interest in the case. Titled Desaparecidos, O Mistério dos Gêmeos de Goiás, The Missing, The Mystery of the Twins from Goiás, the program featured interviews with original investigators, surviving family members, and missing persons case experts. The documentary reached a large audience and sparked a new wave of tips and testimonies, which, though mostly unfruitful, kept the case alive in the public consciousness. One of the most surprising revelations came in 2017 when a retrospective analysis of Antonio Carlos's bank records, using modern fraud detection algorithms, identified suspicious patterns of financial transactions in the months leading up to the disappearance. Small sums were regularly transferred to an unknown account in a bank in Paraguay. Though intriguing, this discovery was not enough to solve the mystery of the family's whereabouts. In 2019, using advanced digital aging projection techniques, the federal police released images of how the twins, now 37 years old, and their parents, aged 67 and 63, might look. These images were widely disseminated in the media and on social networks, generating hundreds of reported sightings across Brazil, all of which were meticulously investigated, but no concrete results were found. Never give up on the truth if you believe that all missing persons deserve to be found. It was stated in the documentary. The year 2021 would mark a turning point in the case, specifically on the night of June 12th, Brazil's Valentine's Day. A man, approximately 39 years old, entered the police station in Brasília, Federal District, claiming to be Paulo Ferreira, one of the missing twins from 1985. Initially treated with skepticism by the on-duty officers, the man provided such a detailed and consistent story that he was immediately referred to higher authorities. The man, who identified himself as Paulo Ferreira but was living under the name Ricardo Mendonça Silva, provided impressive details about his childhood before the disappearance. He accurately described the house in Goiânia. He mentioned names of family members not found in public records, and even recalled the name of the doll found in the trunk of the abandoned car, Lily. This was information that had never been disclosed to the press. I spent 36 years believing that my biological parents had died in an accident and that I was the only survivor. I grew up with this story until I recently found documents that suggested another truth, stated Paulo Ricardo in his initial testimony, which lasted more than 6 hours. The DNA test. Comparing his genetic material with preserved samples from Ghana Konseyeku and other living relatives, confirmed with 99.9% certainty that this man was indeed one of the missing twins from 1985. The news electrified the country, instantly becoming one of the largest cases of reappearance in Brazilian criminal history. Paulo recounted that he was raised by a couple, Sebastião and Regina Mendonça, on a small rural property in the interior of Tocantins, a state that, at the time of the disappearance, was still part of Goiás. Tocantins was officially created in 1988. According to his account, the couple always claimed to have legally adopted him after his biological parents died in a car accident. They raised him as an only child in an isolated environment with little contact with neighbors or relatives. I never suspected anything during my childhood. Sebastião and Regina treated me well within their limitations. We weren't rich, but I never lacked for basic needs. He reported the property was more than an hour away from the nearest town, and I studied at home until I was 15. When I finally started attending a school in the city, Paulo Ricardo explained that after Regina's death in 2018, he began organizing old documents and found anomalies in his own records. His birth certificate had a later issuance date than the supposed accident involving his biological parents, and there was no official adoption document. Intrigued, he began a personal investigation that led him to question his true origins. A definitive twist came in April 2021 when Sebastião, now quite ill and feeling death's proximity, confessed the truth. Paulo had been handed over to them by an unknown man in 1985 in exchange for payment. The couple, unable to have children, accepted the offer without much questioning, desperate to have a child. Sebastião cried a lot when he told me this. He said he always wanted to tell me the truth, but Regina insisted on keeping the secret. He died 2 weeks after the confession, taking many details with him that could have helped fully clarify the case. Paulo said, armed with this new truth about himself, Paulo Ricardo began researching cases of missing children from the 1980s and eventually found reports about the case of the Gêmeos de Goiás, twins from Goiás. The physical resemblance to the projected images of how the twins would look in adulthood deeply impressed him. From that point on, his search for answers led him to Brasilia, where he finally decided to approach the authorities to report his story and undergo the DNA tests that would confirm his identity. Paulo's discovery immediately reignited the investigation into the whereabouts of his twin brother, Pedro, and their parents, Antonio Carlos and Maria Helena. Special teams were assigned, and the case received top priority from both the civil and federal police. Based on the new information provided by Paulo, authorities traced Sebastião and Regina Mendonça and their social circle. They discovered that the couple had connections with a man named Juvenal Cardoso, now deceased, who had links to an underground network of illegal adoptions operating in the Central West region during the 1980s and 1990s. With the confirmation of Paulo Ferreira's identity, a new phase of the investigation began, focused on locating his twin brother Pedro and discovering the fate of their parents. National and international media covered every development, turning the case into one of Brazil's greatest criminal mysteries. In July 2021, investigators were able to trace other cases of irregular adoptions linked to Juvenal Cardoso, the intermediary identified in Paulo's adoption. This led to the discovery of at least 6 other children who had been handed over to families in similar circumstances between 1984 and 1987. Paulo, now officially using his birth name, became an active participant in the investigation, giving interviews and appearing on television programs in the hope that his brother might see him and recognize physical similarities or parts of the story. I grew up as an only child, not knowing that I had an identical twin brother somewhere. Now, I can't stop thinking about him, about how his life must have been, if he also discovered the truth, or if he still lives in ignorance about his origins. Paulo declared in an emotional interview with the Fantastico Sunday program, in August 2021. A promising lead emerged when a retired teacher from Cuiabá, Mato Grosso, contacted authorities after watching Paulo's interview. She reported having taught identical twins in the early 1990s, one of whom had been adopted by a local family under suspicious circumstances. Investigators immediately traveled to Cuiabá only to discover that, although there had indeed been a case of adopted twins, neither of them was Pedro Ferreira. In September, a dramatic twist occurred. Investigators discovered records of a boy with physical traits similar to Paulo and Pedro, who had been admitted to an orphanage in Palmas Tocantins in 1986. The boy, identified in the records as João, had no official documentation and was allegedly left at the facility by a man who claimed to have found him abandoned. Orphanage records indicated that João had been legally adopted by a couple of American missionaries in 1988 and taken to the United States. The federal police immediately initiated international cooperation with the FBI to locate this individual. In November 2021, after months of searching, U.S. authorities located Michael Robertson, the adopted name of João, living in Portland, Oregon. Initially reluctant, Michael agreed to undergo a DNA test after being informed of the possibility that he was the missing twin. The results received in December 2021 were conclusive. Michael Robertson was indeed Pedro Ferreira. The news caused a sensation in both countries, and arrangements were made for a meeting between the two brothers, who had not seen each other since they were 3 years old. The reunion, which took place on January 15, 2022, exactly 37 years after the disappearance, was broadcast live by Brazilian and American broadcasters. The images of the identical twins embracing emotionally at the Brasilia International Airport moved millions of viewers. It's like looking in the mirror and seeing not just my reflection, but the whole history that was denied to me, declared Paulo after the reunion. Michael Pedro, who did not speak Portuguese fluently, commented through an interpreter, "I always felt that something was missing in my life, a part of me I didn't know. Now I understand what it was." While the reunion of the brothers celebrated a happy chapter in this tragic story, one crucial question remained. What happened to Antonio Carlos and Maria Helena, the twins' parents? With the two brothers reunited and actively participating in the investigation, the authorities redoubled their efforts to uncover the fate of Antonio Carlos and Maria Helena. Paulo and Michael Pedro provided additional DNA samples for comparison with databases of unidentified people and remains found over the years. In March 2022, investigators managed to locate Ernesto Cavalcanti, a retired former police officer who had connections with Juvenal Cardoso, the intermediary for the illegal adoptions. Initially resistant, Cavalcanti eventually cooperated with the authorities in exchange for immunity, revealing crucial information. According to his testimony, the disappearance of the Ferreira family did not begin as a crime. Antonio Carlos had become involved in a funds embezzlement scheme at the company where he worked, and, fearing he would be discovered and arrested, decided to flee with his family. The original plan was to settle in Paraguay with false documents. Antonio sought out Juvenal, who was known for providing fake documentation, to help them cross the border and establish new identities. Cavalcanti reported. What he did not know was that Juvenal had other plans. According to Cavalcanti, juveniles saw a lucrative opportunity in the twins. There was significant demand for children for illegal adoption, especially twins, who could fetch considerable sums. Juvenal proposed a deal to Antonio. He would keep the children temporarily while the couple established their new life in Paraguay and then return them later. In exchange, he offered high-quality documents and a sum of money. Desperate and with few options, Antonio Carlos accepted the proposal against Maria Helena's will, who was very reluctant to be separated from their children. The agreement was that the couple would meet Juvenal and the children in Foz do Iguac on the border with Paraguay a week later. What happened after that was a tragedy, continued Cavalcanti. Antonio and Maria Helena never made it to Foz do Iguac. The car they were traveling in had a fatal accident on BR-153 near Annapolis while trying to avoid a police checkpoint. According to Cavalcanti, the accident occurred in a remote area, and because it involved people with false documents and an irregular situation, it was covered up by corrupt police officers linked to Juvenal. The bodies were secretly buried, and the vehicle was later abandoned in Annapolis to mislead the investigation. Juvenal kept the twins and saw a profit opportunity. He sold each of them to different families, ensuring they would never meet or discover their true origins, concluded the former police officer. Based on this information, search teams were sent to the location indicated by Cavalcanti. After days of excavation, on April 12, 2022, remains of two people were found, which DNA tests later confirmed to be those of Antonio Carlos and Maria Helena Ferreira. The official burial ceremony, held on May 5, 2022, at the Campo de Esperanza Cemetery in Goiânia, was attended by the reunited children and dozens of family members who had lived in uncertainty for decades. Investigations continued to identify and prosecute all those involved in the illegal adoption network that separated the twins and covered up the deaths of their parents. More than 15 people were indicted, including former police officers, registry office employees, and intermediaries. Paulo and Michael Pedro, now inseparable despite the language barrier, decided to honor the memory of their parents by establishing the Ferreira Foundation, dedicated to reuniting separated families and assisting in the search for missing people in Brazil and internationally. Our story is both tragic and hopeful, stated Paulo in a joint interview with his brother. We lost 36 years of living together and never truly knew our parents, but we found each other, discovered the truth, and now we can help other families avoid the same suffering. Michael Pedro, who decided to stay in Brazil to reconnect with his roots and learn Portuguese, added, "Every missing person is someone loved by someone. Every unsolved case is a family living in anguish. Our mission now is to turn our pain into hope for others." The case of the Gamios de Goiás, twins from Goiás, as it became known, turned into a symbol of perseverance in the search for truth and the importance of never giving up on finding missing people. No matter how much time has passed, if you've watched this far, it's because you care about these cases that mark families forever. Leave a comment saying, "I watched this far so I can know you and see who truly cares about the search for the truth." Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Leave your like and share this incredible story so more people can learn about cases like this and, who knows, help other families find their loved ones. Amen.